Hello everyone, this is Cobalt. This is the next video in my character analysis series for Brawlhalla. Stick around till the end to hear about entering the giveaway to win community colors, emotes, weapon skins, sidekicks, avatars, or even the battle pass, and voting for the next legends. And if you want to skip all this and get straight into the information, there's a timestamp in the description, and don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up with the release of your favorite legend. In these analyses, I wanted to focus solely on the character's signatures. Light attack combos are covered much more in depth than I ever could elsewhere and function pseudo-comparably for all characters of that weapon class. So I'm not going to be discussing the general neutral of the character with their weapons unless it pertains in some way to their signatures. Firstly, I want to give clear descriptions of the terminology I'll be using. Startup frames are the amount of frames that happen after a move has begun until the first hitbox of the move becomes active. Active frames are the duration of frames that the move contains hitboxes that can collide with your opponent. FAF, or First Actionable Frame, is the first frame available where your character is able to move again after the move has been started. For all of this data, I use the character's jump to display the first actionable frame. Lastly, on miss refers to the move not connecting with an opponent, and on hit refers to the move making contact with an opponent. I'm going to be doing my analysis today on the next voted in legend, Fate. Fate is a cheerful and light-hearted person. She's a witch that spoke to the stars to learn the past, the present, and the future. She sold fortunes and was able to deduce the destiny of a person just by the slightest vision of them. She used her fortune-telling abilities to defeat many strong opponents and even armies. Bryn eventually offered her a place in Brawlhalla, which she graciously accepted. Fate's weapons are Orb and Scythe. She's seen solid competitive results recently, with Scythe and Orb being effective weapons to play with in the current metagame. She has 7 attack and 7 speed with 4 dexterity and 4 defense. She's kind of frail, but she's quick and can hit really hard. She was the second character to have the Orb, and it has proven to be quite effective on her kit. So, do her SIGs make her kit better, or do they detract from her moveset? Well, let's find out. Let's start with her Orb. Orb's side SIG has 24 frames as startup, active frames from 25 to 41 with an FAF of 60. It functions differently on miss than it does on hit. On hit, the move converts into a second hit with active frames from 59 to 68 with a new FAF of 77. Fate summons a pink star, which she rides forward for a little while. If the move makes contact with an opponent during that time, it converts into a second hit where Fate kicks the opponent after the initial hit knocks them upward. This move has a really good travel distance and a pretty high amount of active frames. It makes it decent at traveling back to stage if you're really far away with a gravity cancel. It has a high startup, thanks to the distance that this move covers, but its FAF is about average. It's got solid utility thanks to the high travel distance and active frames on it, and has a good coverage directly in front of her. Orb neutral SIG has 16 frames of startup, active frames from 17 to 21 with an FAF of 48. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Fate slings her orb upward, generating hitboxes for a few frames. It has relatively quick startup and decent FAF. It's only got a few active frames on it, but it has coverage above her, making it incredibly useful for catching opponents that are jumping or attempting to recover high. The SIG has pretty solid coverage, and is pretty quick as well. I think the SIG offers her solid utility on her kit and catches opponents at neutral air dodge after the sidelight. It can KO pretty early off the top additionally with a gravity cancelled hit near the top blast zone. Definitely a solid SIG on her kit in my opinion. Orb down SIG has 13 frames of startup, active frames from 14 to 34 with an FAF of 50. It functions differently on miss than it does on hit. On hit, the move functions as a command grab with a new FAF of 82. Fate draws a star pattern out of magic in the air with her hand. This move has incredibly low startup with only 13 frames. It has decent active frames and catches the opponents pretty well directly in front of her, sending them straight upwards. This move has solid knockout potential. Command grabs are really good in this game and an incredibly effective option for most characters that have them. Additionally, it's worth noting that I recorded this footage prior to patch 4.07, meaning that Orb side SIG and Orb down SIG have slightly different frame data than I've indicated in this video. Please see the patch notes on Brawlhalla's website for any additional changes that may have come from this. Next up is her Scythe. Scythe's side SIG has 16 frames of startup, active frames from 17 to 34 with an FAF of 51. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Fate slings her Scythe forward, shooting 3 small star projectiles from it at the end. It extends pretty far away from her and has decent active frames. It has solid startup and FAF, being pretty quick given its range. It's worth noting that this move doesn't hit directly in front of her, so it's required to be spaced well to effectively hit and shouldn't be used if your opponent is very close to Fate. It can be effective at catching opponents recovering at ledge though thanks to its range disjoint. Scythe neutral SIG has 15 frames of startup, active frames from 16 to 33 with an FAF of 48. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Fate extends her Scythe upward, and summons a burst of star energy from the ground a slight distance away from her and extends the energy upward, shooting hitboxes from the ground upwards. This move has a good startup, decent FAF, and it catches opponents on the ground as well as those in the air, making it good for catching opponents that are jumping as well as those recovering high at ledge. Thanks to its low startup, this move is pretty quick, and can additionally catch opponents that neutral dodge out of a neutral light on the Scythe. It's a decent sig in my opinion. Scythe down sig has 29 frames of startup, active frames from 30 to 44 with an FAF of 64. It functions the same on miss as it does on hit. Fate disappears and reappears with a crescent moon symbol about half the stage length away. It converts into a massive side swing after she is teleported. It has pretty high startup and end lag, but given the travel distance, it makes sense. It has several very small linking hitboxes at the bottom of Fate's body so it can still connect with stacked opponents. This sig is good for catching opponents off guard as a burst option, it's useful for travel distance if you're returning to stage, and it's good for potentially edge guarding opponents from a distance. Very niche but not terrible, especially considering it has a decent amount of active frames. So overall, her sigs are pretty good in terms of their frame data. 4 of her 6 sigs have 16 frames of startup or lower, which is pretty solid. The remaining 2 have a fair bit of travel distance, so their higher startup is more reasonable. They all have an okay FAF as well. Her side sigs and neutral sigs offer coverage both in front of her on either weapon, though on her Scythe these need to be spaced slightly better. Her sigs offer her reasonable coverage and frame data with pretty good coverage options. I think additionally that Orb down sig is really good. It's an effective command grab with really fast startup and knockout potential, and is probably my favorite sig on her kit. Though with the slight nerfs to this from patch 4.07, this could change. I think that her sigs do truly have a lot of utility, not the best of any character for sure, but they're definitely pretty good, and have a decent amount of utility with her kit. Today's code to put down in the comments is Soul Eater, along with your Twitter handle, and if you get that reference, I appreciate it. Tune in tomorrow for coverage on the highest voted legend from this week. Comment to vote for next week's 5 legends. I'll be continuing this once a day, Monday through Friday, over the next 10 weeks until all 50 legends are covered. So, thanks for joining me on this ride. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the release of your favorite legend, and I hope to see you back for the next one. Once again, I'm Cobalt, and thanks for watching.